to, yeah, there we go. I'm really excited to welcome you all today to the launch of WEAll's recent briefing paper on water in the wellbeing economy. And so for anybody who's not familiar with WEAll briefings, it's a paper series of ours that has the subtitle Little Summaries of Big Ideas, because really felt that the ideas and the solutions in order to transform to a well-being economy are out there. It's just that oftentimes they can be, hidden in project documents or case studies or academic literature and grade papers, and not always really accessible in a way that makes the transformations that we're seeking feel possible. And so the idea of this series was to really synthesize the existing ideas, to illustrate examples of where we're seeing this transition already occurring towards a well-being economy. But over the past year, we went through a bit of an experimentation of trying to figure out what really is that right structure for these kind of briefing papers to do justice to the idea of it being accessible, but also comprehensive. And Rohit and Hugh were both really instrumental in this experimentation process, and were very patient and engaged with trying to figure out, by going through a lot of different kind of topics with a lot of different authors on a range of different issues, to sort of figure out what does that structure look like that could do justice to these principles, but also ensure that the information is really communicated in a way that will resonate with the world. And so what we came to through a lot of, experimentation and deliberation was the idea that, first of all, these papers should really start with not the problem, but a vision statement, right? And so in this case, the vision statement is a world where everyone has access to secure water in a way that it sustainably flows, right? And beginning with that vision of really what we want our water system and a well-being economy to really look like, to go through what are the leading solutions, the ideas that are out there. And so, I'll caveat here. So we wanted these papers to be short. So we said something about, 15, 20 pages max. And so you'll be amazed to see the range of topics that are covered in this paper, ranging from urban water systems to redefining the value of itself. And on top of all of that, for us, the accessibility point was really important. So created this kind of rule where you should write this paper as if you were trying to explain to somebody or your uncle who knows nothing about the topic. And so I think Hugh and Rohit have done an incredible job of not only covering such a wide range of often really technical information in a way that's really accessible and beautifully written, but to do that with also, I think, a lot of genuine collaboration and sort of co-creation in their hearts as well. And so not only is this sort of a launch of a briefing paper, but it's really the beginning and an invitation for dialogue. And so when developing this event as well, they really wanted this to be a starting point for them to bring forth ideas, but to really engage in a discussion with the membership as well around this really vital topic. I think, especially at this point, I don't know about all of you, but I'm feeling pretty bummed out about the environmental crisis. And so for me, being able to work with incredible and brilliant young scholars like Rohit and Hugh on topics like this that really illustrate that change is not only possible, but already happening, has really given me a lot of hope. So with that, I would love to hand it over to them, share with you some of their insights.
Thanks, Amanda. What I'll do now is I'll probably share my screen so you guys can see. Right, let's see if it works. Can you guys see my screen? Can you?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I made a fancy presentation for you all. So hope you guys like it. So yeah, thanks Amanda for that. Yeah, so this is Water in a Wellbeing Economy. Thank you guys all for coming and listening to us and being open to having this sort of discussion, because as Amanda said, we through that vision, we sort of try to see what are solutions that exist to meet this vision, but it's only sort of a stepping stone. And We really want to be having like a discussion about what else we could do, what are the other solutions out there, who are all like the people working in this interesting space. So yeah, thank you all for coming. So yeah, so that's me over there on the left. My name is Rohit. I recently finished my undergrad in Environment and Sustainability and Development Studies at the ANU in Australia. And the reason why I decided to do this water paper with WEAll, why I decided to pick water, is because I'm pretty interested in sustainable water management, but also aspects of water justice, like who gets allocated water, and also tools such as geographic information systems to really empower historically resources like water. So that's sort of where my interest sort of lies.
Yeah, and I'm Hugh Capel. I'm also very thankful for everyone who's here tonight. Really appreciate the potential for discussion that can come from this presentation. I'm in a very similar position to Rohit. I recently graduated from the Australian National University with a degree in environment and sustainability. And I find the realm of water management presents many fascinating opportunities for new technologies to be used for the benefit of the masses. And this is something which drew me to this project with WEAll.
Sick. All right, so this is sort of like an overview of this small talk that we're going to give. It's not that long. But yeah, so as Amanda said, like, so the first thing is, why do we even need a well-being economy for water, right? Then the vision that we sort of came up with that sort of structures our entire paper. So we have the vision. We spend like a little bit of time on the current situation or system to show how the current situation is not really facilitating the vision. But the most important thing is, what are the many ways in which this vision is actually being met. That's sort of the more important bit, rather than what's all the bad stuff that's happening, what's all the good that's happening. I think that's what we really try to show in this paper.
Firstly, though, we're going to discuss why it matters and why it's important that we begin having these discussions with others. To put it succinctly, water is essential to human ecological well-being, and it's the reason we're here on this planet. I'm sure if you've had a chance to read our paper, you notice that we compare water to a holy relic. And this is because we believe in the supreme importance of this vital resource. It was through this passion for water that we embarked on the journey of discovery that has brought us here today.
Yeah, I'm so passionate that I've got like an earth background behind me. That's because of my passion for the blue planet. So yeah, the first step of this entire process was coming up with a vision, because that was the stepping stone for our entire paper. And that did take a while, but eventually we sort of came up with this vision. So we envision a well-being economy where all people are ensured safe and secure water access, and sustainable water flows are created and maintained. So that was kind of the main vision statement that we came up with. By sustainable, we mean that the rate of water extraction doesn't exceed the rate at which it can be naturally replenished, and also that the rate at which it's polluted isn't greater than the rate at which it can be recycled or absorbed or even made harmless by the planet naturally. So that's sort of the basis of our vision.
We also thought that a wellbeing economy should consider who uses the water, how it is accessed, and how it's distributed. So we thought we'd include the principles for water ethics. Those are outlined in a paper that's referenced within our report. And these are respect for human dignity, equity and proportionality in distribution, solidarity between various stakeholders, common good, responsible stewardship, and inclusive and deliberative participation. And our paper is guided by these principles, and that's where we base out a lot of our solutions that we've discussed in there are on these principles here. So once we came up with a vision, we tried to see how the current water situation either doesn't help facilitate or actively chooses not to meet up to this vision. I'm sure a lot of us here, either working in this space or otherwise, are aware of the substantial challenges that exist. Erratic rainfall patterns exacerbated by climate change, polluted water, ineffective transnational water legislation, gaps in technology, outdated urban water systems, and our current economic system finds it very hard to actually define and evaluate the true value of water in terms of the ways in which it contributes to our well-being.
Yeah, and as Amanda said in the beginning, it's very easy to feel sort of bummed about the whole situation, or at least for me, it was very easy to feel overwhelmed that, oh, there's so many things sort of going wrong. And also my entire degree has pretty much geared me towards questioning current environmental practices. So it hasn't been very easy to like step back. But it was Amanda, Isabel, and Claire as well, who's with us for a bit for the paper, who sort of told us to avoid, simply condemning the system, but instead, like I guess so many of you are doing as well, talk about ways in which solutions exist, but not only do they exist theoretically, but they're being put into practice right now. Essentially convert this sort of negative to a more positive discourse, because I feel like it's very easy to complain, but people have been complaining for a very, very long time, and that doesn't mean that anything actually happens. So yeah, there's a real need to shift the discourse to acknowledge what's bad, but also emphasize the real good that can be done. And that's sort of what we've tried to do in this entire paper. So solutions, how do we make this vision that we've come up with into reality? So based on the current situation, we sort of broke down potential solutions into categories. So in our paper, we have good governance, ecosystem services accounting, health and sanitation, agriculture, industry, and urban water systems. And each of these categories are broken up into subcategories as well, if you've seen our paper. And essentially, we try to find as many case studies or examples as we could to show that these solutions exist right now, that sort of subtle shifts are happening right now. And we also recognize, that these solutions are ever broadening and they're always changing, and these are only a few select solutions that we've sort of found, but there's so many more that exist, and so many more that could exist depending on particular contexts. So yeah, really, like, just want to repeat again that this is just a sort of stepping stone towards having a think about what water and a well-being economy actually means, and how all of us, so individuals, NGOs, businesses, think tanks, governments, can all really contribute towards and facilitate water and a well-being economy. So yeah, so we'd like to share some of the case studies or some of the solutions that sort of intrigued us the most. So yeah, the one of them, which falls under governance or good governance, is common stewardship. So good governance is pretty important if we are to have a well-being economy for water. And this is because water is a universal public good, so everyone is entitled to it. But also it's a common property resource, so it is to be shared because it is of limited supply. And essentially, one approach to water governance is common stewardship. And what happens here is water is declared as collectively owned by citizens of a region, locality, or country, and collective rules and norms are sort of established for its present and future management. And sometimes a really cool thing called a common asset trust is made. And this is made to legalize the explicit obligations of protection and taking care, management of the particular resource, in this case, water, as well as creating binding rights for present and future generations regarding that particular resource. So it's, yeah, common asset trust. And yeah, I find this pretty cool. And in 2007, 2011, and 2014, I think, Vermont proposed the creation of a common asset trust for state protection of assets, I guess, like air and water, that's held in common, basically, and for future generations, while also establishing rules by which certain users, so big businesses, for example, were charged fees, which were then deposited into a common asset trust fund to protect and take care of the particular resource in perpetuity for present and future generations. So it's pretty neat system. And it's also cool because the funds the funds in the trust can also have distributive impacts. So it's really good for equity as well. So it can be used for government spending, or it can be used for dividend payments for citizens. Perhaps even, funding something like universal basic income scheme could be an idea. Although the Vermont EAT was an idea and wasn't eventually passed, the government in Costa Rica is thinking of doing something similar. And there's also places in Australia, like, for example, me and Hugh actually worked on this one project in Carricalinga, the south of Australia, and the community there are thinking of implementing something like a common asset trust to manage their water system. So it's an interesting solution that is finding footholds, I suppose. Another one that I think is cool is which falls under the realm of accounting for water's true value, is payment for ecosystem services. So ecosystem services is essentially the well-being that we derive from the natural environment. So typically that can include provisioning services. So like, for example, wood from a tree could be a provisioning service that tree provides. Regulatory services, so that includes carbon sequestration, it includes erosion control or water retention, that's what the tree does. And cultural services, so that includes recreation, like I like going on hikes, that's a recreation service that I get from the environment. Or for a lot of indigenous people, a lot of natural ecosystems are sacred, and that's a cultural service that it provides. And most water ecosystem services really emphasize the provisioning aspects of it, but they sort of neglect regulatory or cultural services that water also provides, which is super important, as well as a lot of co-benefits like biodiversity or better land productivity or ecosystem health, which in turn influences human health. So one way to make sure that all these sort of ecosystem services are accounted for is payment for ecosystem services. And that's a method in which the cost of provision and protection is paid for in a way that emphasizes sustainability and justice, so not just market efficiency. And this method can work because, unfortunately or fortunately, estimating and demonstrating value in terms of monetary terms is sort of, that makes the most sense to policymakers, economists, makes the most sense to public as well. And not for water, but the government in Costa Rica has made waves in introducing a payment for ecosystem services scheme to reduce deforestation in the region. But also WEAll, which is a French company, in 1993, they launched like a compensation program with the French dairy farming sector that aimed to preserve groundwater quality and water quality for real sustained agriculture by paying farmers in cash, or in kind, or in technical assistance, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's essentially paying the people involved to make sure that all the ecosystem services are accounted for. Of course, if you're thinking about a well-being economy, that's a payment for ecosystem services is useful, but it isn't perfect, right? Because it could run the risk of commodifying a natural resource which isn't meant to be commodified anyway, or it runs the risk of reducing people's intrinsic motivation to actually conserve or protect something. And that's why we also have other ways to account for what is value. So we have nudges, like, for instance, like more water efficient taps or shower heads, for instance. That's a nudge. Networks. So this can be if like a social media influencer or something talks about a cool solution related to water. I'm not saying I'm a social media influencer. I'm not, but I'm just saying. Or like, or like they talk about the importance of water conservation, building collective social norms, because that naturally puts pressure on people. Indigenous custodial management is a great solution to account for what is true value, because that's what Indigenous people have been doing for thousands of years. And it's essentially through culture, through law, it is looking at water in a more intrinsic, holistic way. And so that's a great solution again, if we are to account for what is true value in a well-being economy. And we also have water management tools. So like practical tools, like for instance, there are things called landscape function analyses, which look at how the ecosystem is functioning, and through that essentially emphasizes the importance of a good water system. Or we have GIS sort of technologies, which is what I'm interested in, which can also be used to account for what is true value. So so these are all the ways, all like different ways in which we could do this, but the important thing is accounting for what is true value. And then, this is another one that we had, which is coming up with a circular economy for water. And this is also something that I think is pretty cool, because a circular economy essentially tries to keep resources in a loop for as long as possible through better design. It tries to reduce waste to zero, which is kind of what we need, and also regenerate natural systems. And for water, this really emphasizes harnessing the water cycle. So if you look here in this diagram, you have fresh water source, and in a circular economy, that would be stored for as long as possible. But then even after it's used through the supply system, it's either reused or it's recycled or it's re-optimized and replenished to complete the loop of the natural system, similar to how the natural water cycle operates. So I think that's pretty cool. And Singapore has actually done something related to a circular economy with their new water project. So this project, it recycles treated sewage or used water through a 3-tier purification system. So it involves microfiltration or ultrafiltration, reverse osmosis, and then ultraviolet disinfection. And after it goes through the entire process, it's then like chucked into a reservoir and collected to mix with rainwater after it's collectively treated again for drinking. So it's literally sewage water that can be treated and gone back in the system to be used for drinking. And I think that's really cool. And over the years, this has actually grown to meet, I think, up to 40% of Singapore's water needs. So it's pretty remarkable, I think, that they're able to do that.
I find the nature-based solutions are the really interesting ones for me. They ride the ecosystem services and commons, circular economy thought processes, but then take it to a point further beyond that. And that focuses on preserving ecosystem function and natural processes rather than building artificial, expensive water infrastructure like dams. This includes building wetlands, forests, and green spaces to regulate water flow, prevent soil erosion, and filter toxic substances and build resilience in the ecosystem. An example of this is the Wallace Island wetlands in England. In response to erosion and habitat loss along the Crouch and Roach estuaries of England, this project recycled sediments from its salt marshes to build a sort of flood protection system. It was then allowed to flood, and its mudflats and salt marshes were allowed to evolve naturally with the water cycle. This wetland is now the largest man-made one in Europe and supports nearly 500 hectares of restored wetland.
How cool is that?
Sorry?
Oh, sorry, I just said that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And coming from an environmental science background, one of my other favorite solutions is the rain gardens or sponge cities in China, or water sensitive urban design in Australia, or even low impact development in the US. These designs try and incorporate water, like small scale water management systems into urban infrastructure. This isn't entirely limited to urban infrastructure and can be used in agricultural systems, including the construction of things like leaky weirs, which are a popular, increasing in popularity sort of water management system here in Australia, regarding like the construction of kind of wood or sediment banks that slow down water over a farmland as opposed to entirely stopping it and storing it. So it's just like a less intrusive alteration to the natural landscape that still allows for a function for the farmers, but also maintains the sort of integrity of the ecological system. And it's crazy just how much benefit that these nature-based solutions can generate. They have the ability to improve biodiversity, reduce erosion, sequester carbon, and even improve natural filtration and purification of waters. And then there's all the recreational, cultural, and well-being benefits that come alongside all this.
Yeah, essentially, that's sort of just some of the solutions that we thought were the most interesting in our paper, but there are many more in our paper, like solutions as well as case studies. So do give it a read if you can. But even beyond that, there's so many more that exist. And some of you right here are working on some of them. So that's really cool. But essentially what we want everyone to kind of get out of it is that a vision for water and a well-being economy is both desirable and achievable. And these are some solutions, but many more solutions exist. And that's sort of why we want to open up a discussion about it and see where we can kind of go from here. So yeah, thank you guys for
Thank you.
Yeah, for listening. Thanks. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. That was wonderful. Yeah, I really appreciate all the examples that you gave. So we're going to open up a discussion and have a little Q&A. And I know you and Rohit, there are a couple members on the call that you want to ask different questions to. So if you want to ask a question, you may put the question in the chat, or you may use your raise your hand function, and we'll go from there. And you and Rohit, if you, yeah, you can incorporate when you want to ask those questions. So maybe we start in free flow. Catherine.
Thanks, Isabel, and thanks, guys. That was really fantastic. Really enjoyed that. I'm just wondering, and maybe it's sort of for beyond the scope of the paper, so no problem if that's the case, but just wondering about your sense of the sort of citizen mobilization around water, and some of the examples you gave. Were any of them the result of local people organizing and agitating, or are they largely sort of technical government sponsored initiatives? I'm just sort of curious about that interaction between the public on water issues and some of the brilliant case studies and examples that you gave. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question, Catherine. Yeah, so it's not only technical solutions. We did also have a few ones that stemmed from citizen mobilization. Actually, one of the solutions in our governance section in the paper was like public participation, because I think that's pretty crucial, particularly in urban water systems. If we want sort of a well-being economy for water, or policies that align more towards that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but if you give me a second, I can give you an example. Yeah, so the one that we used I mean, I'm sure there are like heaps more anyway. But the one that we used was one in Kitale in Kenya. And essentially what they did there was they used public participation to sort of bring, like local people sort of use that to bring water and sanitation to slum areas by creating a collectively managed community inventory that mapped out various local institutions, including like marginalized groups, so women's groups, young people's groups. And what they did through that was they got a better idea of water distribution and water allocation, and that sort of thing in their particular context. And because it was public participation, like people were involved, it sort of allowed the entire system to sort of function better. I'm not sure if I explained that properly, but yeah. But definitely there's a lot of, okay, cool. There's there's a lot. Citizen mobilization is definitely a part of these solutions.
Yeah, one of the other things we also bring up is the importance of clear and accessible information, and we hope that our paper and the way that it's written adds to that, and that clear and accessible information should help people make better decisions with regards to water usage and water management, and even just look at the ways in which their governments are operating when it comes to water management, to allow for the nudges that we've suggested to occur.
Yeah,
That's something else we suggest.
Yeah, for sure. Like utilizing purchasing power, and buying less water intensive goods, or recycling, upcycling, even cultural lifestyle choices, like reducing meat consumption or that sort of thing. They're all ways in which citizens can do things. We have a section on that in the paper.
Isabel, is your
My
mic working?
Yeah, my microphone's being a little funky. I'm sorry. Sasha, and then Russell.
Thank you. No, thanks a lot for the presentation. I think it's great. I just want to maybe give it a different approach, and I think that a lot of the solutions that you presented are really tackling in a very effective way the consequences of lack of water. But to what extent can we put more emphasis on the root cause of the lack of water, which is the fact that our ecosystems are deteriorating, and because of that, we don't have enough water in the system as a whole, right? And yeah, you mentioned a couple of things about water retention, etc. But I really think that to put a lot more emphasis in making what today is very scientific in terms of how do we retain water in the soils and how important that is, and how can we bring that back to the day-to-day in terms of what we do. And from my experiences, the deterioration of ecosystems has a lot to do with the way we manage our lands in general.
Yeah.
And I know you're talking about meat, and we can save water by reducing meat consumption. But at the same time, one of the main projects that I'm involved in is about regenerating soil through improving the grasslands, and we use the cattle as a main tool to do that, because the cattle contributes a lot to the soils, regenerating soils, really increasing the absorption of water, and really it's all about water harvesting at the end of the day. So it's a bit of how can we put a bit more emphasis on the root cause rather than on managing the consequences.
Exactly. Thank you for that. And I completely agree. We have a bit in our paper as well that kind of talks about agriculture and land management, and how that can better sort of agricultural systems can lead to better water systems. And in Australia, at least, I know that there's this system called holistic grazing, and you might be talking about something similar in which.
Yeah, that's what I'm involved in. It's holistic management, and we use.
Oh yeah, sick. Yeah,
we keyline principles in terms of water retention is one of the
exactly.
main tools. So it's a combination of keyline and cattle management, which
Yeah,
allows you to improve the retention of water in the land.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. First of all, it was a terrific presentation, and the paper is extraordinarily well thought out and very well researched. So thank you. And yet it's still accessible for all of its intellectual heft. What advice might you have now that you've finished this work for raising awareness about these issues in places where there isn't yet a water shortage? If there are water shortages, or if water is very hard to get, people pay attention. But as a species, we have a terrible track record for being preventative about anything. And one of the issues that we have in Scotland is that Scotland is in a very different situation than, let's say, England, in that water is still a public good and it hasn't been privatized to the extent that it has in England, which means that in theory, it's not subject to the same abuses that water is in, clean water is in the south of England, where these private companies make a very transactional analysis about, we'll get a fine for 90 million, but we'll have $500 million in profit, so we'll pay the fine, and they are not called to account. Because we don't have a visible water shortage in Scotland, and water is still considered a public good, it can be difficult to get people to feel a sense of urgency about the preventative measures that we can take. Did you have any thoughts on places where people have done that well?
That's a good point, actually. I'm not too sure, because I think a lot of the solutions that we've found, as you rightly said, people typically respond when there's a crisis, or they respond when they feel like they have to. And yeah, a lot of the solutions that we've found happened or took place because there was an immediate problem, or like, for example, another governance solution that we didn't talk about in this presentation, but that's there in the paper, is assigning rights to river systems, for example. And that's an interesting governance solution. And the sort of reason why that kind of happened in the case of India was because the river was completely polluted. And in the case of the Whanganui in New Zealand, I think it was also, for the Whanganui, it was sort of different because it was, the Maori had custodianship over it, the Maori people of that region. And that's sort of why that river system was given natural rights. But again, it was a problem in the sense that, I guess, European water management wasn't meeting the standard that the indigenous people there wanted it to meet. So I think that's an interesting point you raised, and I'm not too sure, to be honest. Sorry.
To be fair, I'm asking you to crack a problem that no government has been able to crack for 300 years. So I just thought if you had it sitting on your desk, we might as well take advantage of it. So.
Love it. I mean, one of the things I should mention as well is that this is very much meant to be a dialogue. So while we're first send all of our questions to Hugh and Rohit, I think we'll also create some questions. They have questions for the group as well. So maybe let's also all keep that question in our mind, because maybe some other people also have some thoughts on that, because it's really, really critical, obviously, Russell. So really, really great question. Nesma, do you have a question?
Yes, first of all, I'm sorry I don't have my camera open. I'm not able to open it at this moment. And I want to thank you both, Rohit and Hugh, for this wonderful presentation. I want to build on Russell's question. Like you said, Amanda, it's a very important question. It's a very significant one. And so knowing that usually governments and people don't work in a preventative mode, do you have any recommendations for future research areas for developing cities? Because the pattern I'm noticing now is that developing cities are building cities and behaviors in the way that developed cities do, and then eventually they will end up probably in the same situation where they're running out of water, and they actually are already running out of water. So are there any research areas that you recommend us to research in to inform developing cities so that they are more water sensitive or water aware?
One of the sections that we have in our paper is on those urban water systems, and I'm not sure if this entirely answers the question, but one of the areas that we found quite interesting to research was the kind of sponge cities or water sensitive design. And I think one of the key principles with that was the idea of kind of like trying to decentralize the water supply to some extent. So like one of the big issues with one of our case studies in Jakarta is that their water supply, their infrastructure that they have is lacking. It doesn't supply majority of the population with safe water most of the time, and people looking there at opportunities to decentralize their water supply. And so things like the water sensitive urban design and the incorporation of treatment of wastewater and grey water are like good opportunities, and there's a lot of potential for development, both in a technological aspect, but also in like a social realm as well, because obviously there's a bit of like people aren't hugely interested in drinking recycled wastewater, so there's obviously opportunities to educate and demonstrate that this is a method that can be safely implemented. I'm not sure if Rohit, do you have anything else?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think nature-based solutions in this context are insane. Like, because particularly in developing countries context, nature-based solutions are actually cheaper than more like technical infrastructural solutions, and they also have so many more kind of co-benefits. So it is kind of a shame that a lot of countries are trying to emulate like a very industrial Western model when they're, like, for instance, increasing urban green space is a great way to increase like water absorption in those particular areas. You can even increase urban greening on buildings and things like that. Like I know they've done stuff in Melbourne, which is pretty cool. And also, I don't know, like retaining ecosystems like wetlands or mangroves, for example, in cities as well are amazing for preventing floods, reducing the extent of damage of storms, which in turn saves money. So it's win-win again, as well as providing sort of biodiversity benefits, water purification benefits. Yeah, there's a whole field, I think, of study in urban, water sensitive. I know in Australia it's urban sensitive water design, but as you said, it's called so many more things in different parts of the world. So I know it as water sensitive urban design, but like, yeah, that sort of area. I'm not sure anything more to add on that, because it's pretty cool, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, that was very helpful.
Yeah, cool.
Liliana.
I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. There are so many beautiful things about water. The one thing that comes into my mind, and you guys talked a little bit about it with regards to when we start accounting for the functions of water. Yeah. So within the planetary health language, let's say, we talk about virtual water. And where water is included in every single production of everything that is manufactured on planet Earth, but no one is accounting for that. So therefore, there is this aspect of, okay, how can we make water being accounted for everything as a good, right? As we account electricity, as we account everything else, there's this aspect. Then, as you pointed out, how can we make, from an ecosystem perspective, the benefits and measure them, the benefits the water has for the ecosystem including humans, and of course non-humans. So I think, so it's a question, a reflection here, that if more people are able to see those visuals, and I'm thinking specifically the one you showed about, you have a little ecosystem with all the visuals of what water is responsible for, perhaps we're going to help a little bit more educate and raise awareness of the value of water.
Yeah.
Because as well, you know, I'm on the east coast of California, which on the east coast of the United States, and I have spent a lot of time in California, and water.
True.
And it's, I mean, it's beyond, and I'm Greek, and we have been having a lot of issues the last couple of weeks with the fires. So there's a lot to be said about water, but there is no respect about water because there is not an awareness of how much we use water. And I think there needs to be that raising of awareness that somehow I think we all, in the educational aspect, we need to bring up. And the visuals are fantastic. So as you have worked with this paper, where have you found the validity or the value that when you communicate this aspect, it has?
Oh, Liliana, you cut out at the very end. Yeah, so this is at the very end of your question around when you're communicating about these concepts in the paper.
Okay.
Yeah, what was the last thing you said?
So I said, if you have seen it from your interactions and the paper research, that this aspect of actually counting and showcasing the value of water has and is helping to raise awareness, so that hopefully we can start shifting something here. Yeah.
That's a good question again. I think that in terms of, you know, accounting for the true value of water in that way, like personally, I find the kind of the kind of things that's going on in that space very academic, you know, and I think that's one issue in terms of getting more people thinking about all the sort of things that water is actually involved in, is because the very nature of accounting for the very nature of ecosystem services accounting or natural capital accounting, whatever, is that it's got a lot of economics, it's got a lot of like environmental science, and it's very academic. And I know a few sort of people at the ANU as well, where me and Hugh studied, who are sort of working in this area, and they like, when speaking to them, like they seem to believe that it's a good way to convince governments or policymakers sort of about the fact that water exists in almost every product that we have. But in terms of educating the public, I think you might need to, it is useful, but it's also very hard to grapple with. Like, how do you account for the true value? Like, how do you even measure that, you know? And I feel like that's very hard for people to grapple. I know it's hard for me to kind of understand. So I think if we are to communicate something like this to the general public, it needs to be done in a different way in terms of how it's being done right now. I'm not sure that answered your question, but that's sort of thinking.
I reckon one thing that Rohit and I worked on recently was a project in South Australia that was about how to manage a small scale catchment system. And that was the final report for that wasn't a communication towards the government. It was more centered towards the community and advising just a local community panel as to how they should approach the management of that catchment area. And in terms of like what we tried to do to demonstrate the sort of payment for ecosystem services and the water accounting sort of stuff, like it was very complicated and we didn't come to a final like value in the end because it was just that complicated. We had some estimates but nothing concrete, but we found that using like systems diagrams was effective and people were really interested in that. And we used a lot of GIS actually in that project, the geographic information systems. And so representing a lot of those, water management components spatially actually resonated with the community much more than we anticipated. I think there was quite a strong reception towards using that sort of visualization in, conveying this complicated concept. Because essentially it was how do we give the farmers a value for their water so that we can say, we'll pay you this much money and then we get this much water to essentially manage it better in the catchment area.
Excellent. So, I mean, time has just flown. Yeah, we only have 5 more minutes. I don't know if anybody else has a quick question that they would want to ask. Yes, Michael.
A very quick question. Was there any evidence of the huge imbalance between those places like Scotland and England that have masses of water and waste so much, as against other parts of the world where water is valued in a very different way? Because if you don't have it, it's worth a hell of a lot more than if you do have it. And in our case in England, as was mentioned earlier on, water companies are quite happy to take fines of £90 million and don't care what they do to the water because there's so much of it. But the damage to our society is as bad in different ways as it is to where there is no water, but it's measured very differently. Did that come out at all?
So I see Sasha also popping up here. I don't know if he wants to respond, but if you want to go first, Hugh and Rohit, yeah, but I see also Sasha seems to be chomping at the bit as well. Do you want to say something, Sasha, to this?
I was just going to quickly say, that like our Rohit and I have the perspective of Australia where water management is just such a crucial sort of situation. The Murray-Darling Basin, you can send farmers bankrupt if they're caught stealing water from the system there, and there's people who've been imprisoned for doing just that. So it's interesting because we approached this project very much thinking of it in a drought kind of perspective. And I remember our first draft that we sent through, all our language was centered around there being drought as opposed to an overabundance of water, because it was like, that's what we know. There's only water in scarcity rather than water in excess. So it's definitely one of those really interesting things that we had to kind of work around and get a better understanding of when we were researching this paper. I'm not sure if Sasha has anything to add to this one.
No, I just wanted to leave everybody with a thought. I live in southern Spain, and in the days of my grandparents, roofs were flat. They were designed to collect water. Everything went into a reservoir. Every house had a reservoir where you'd collect the rainwaters. And today, with the younger generations, that doesn't exist. All those reservoirs have been converted into garages for cars, or have been converted into a place to go and have some drinks with the friends on the weekend. and there's no consciousness about what for centuries and centuries our predecessors have done, right? And we don't need to look very far to know what we need to do to start to do things in a different way and start to appreciate that very valuable water. And southern Spain is a pretty brittle area, let alone when you go further south to the more deserted areas of Africa, etc., North Africa, right? So anyway, just some food for thought.
Thank you for that, Sasha. So with this, I think we're going to wrap this up. I really want to thank Hugh and Rohit. You did an incredible job, not only with this paper, but this presentation, really engaging with these questions in such a thoughtful sort of way. I think I get the sense that we could have a much longer conversation. So I hope that we can continue this as well. I mean, I think for me, it also really stimulated some of those core questions, right? Around when we have issues of what we value in this economy, is the solution to price it, right? Or to recognize sacredness in some other sort of cultural way? It brings up questions around, is our purpose to deal with problems or to achieve vision and solutions? And how do we shift that logic of just constantly trying to just deal with the symptoms of the system and really get to the root causes and be preventative? And I think so much of that is really at the heart of the Wellbeing economy movement and us trying to really move from just focusing on putting out fires, as it were, to really thinking about the world we want to create. And so I want to just say at the end, special thanks also to both Russell, and I know that you had questions for her as well as Sasha. And so I hope you'll continue the conversation. I know Rohit and Hugh are both recently on the job market as well. So if you have an understanding of the space, be interested in talking with them, have some ideas, I'm sure that they would really appreciate that as well. So with that, I have a wonderful week. And thank you so much for joining this briefing paper launch. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.